Welcome back to Beyond the Spectrum. This is Dreem sharing our family's journey with autism with you, and this is episode 24. So today we're going to be getting into the era of life after deciding to stick with being gluten-free. Now, it's really hard because we didn't go back and forth after that. We just stuck with a gluten-free diet. So it's really easy for people to say, well, you don't know that it was the fact that you were gluten-free that made such a difference. You're right, I can't prove anything because I'm one person that's looking at our family and the impacts that were there and the changes that we saw, and I'm attributing it to being gluten-free. Now, I'm not saying that that was the only deciding factor, but I do believe it played an integral role in not just his life, but in our lives as well. As I said, you can do your own research, and I really encourage you to do it, but when you look into what happens with gluten and the body and the gut and the way that toxins start leaking outside of that leaky gut syndrome that is caused often, then you'll understand why these toxins are actually creating these traffic jams up into the brain and causing all of these issues and fog. And it's a lot more than just fog. But again, I won't go deep into that. Please take the time to do your own research and do your own experiments too. Having said that, I really did start to see a maturity that was evolving in his heart and mind and spirit and the way that he was expressing himself. In the same way that in yesterday's episode, I shared what Sam's son had said, that is what we were seeing. All of a sudden, these concepts that were locked in his mind and he had trouble expressing, his tongue was loosened. All of a sudden, he was able to say to us, do you know what I was feeling during this time when he's recalling a memory? And he would remember all of the things that were associated with it. And he would be able to not only remember it, but be able to very eloquently express and convey those things to us in a way where we were really impressed and really enlightened, because the way that an autistic child can explain to you what is going on in their mind is fascinating. Because when you're looking at someone from the outside and they are having trouble communicating, what we often do is we assume that there is a lower intelligence. If you think about even kind of in humorous situations where we look at people in movies or even in real life situations where there's a language barrier. Maybe it's not an intelligence thing or, a maturity thing or anything like a disability. Maybe it's a true language barrier. This is not their first native language and now they're trying to communicate with you. What do we see happening in the movies, right? Or in real life? We see the people raising their voice. Do you understand me? As if them talking louder is going to kind of push through that barrier when it's not. It's not an understanding, issue as far as intelligence. It's definitely not a hearing problem. But because we don't really understand what they're understanding, we go beyond what is necessary. And I think that's what happens a lot of times with autistic people. We, as a society, tend to look at them as if they're not experiencing it in the same way that we would. And I would tell you, based on our journey, that is not true. They are absolutely feeling very similar things to us. Maybe not exact, because there are some differences in the way they feel things, but it is intense. It is just as frustrating for them to not be able to convey that as it is for us to not be able to understand that and connect with them. But when these keys came and unlocked him, all of a sudden he was able to go, this is what it felt like. This is what I was understanding. I completely understood this. And you know what? It confused me why I was feeling this way. Like he would tell us in certain situations where he would remember. He remembered the situation where he was at the birthday party and crying next to me. He remembered thinking, why am I so afraid of them? There's nothing to be afraid of. But it was overwhelming to him. And it was such a beautiful gift for him to be able to now say, sit down, let me tell you what it was that I experienced. It was amazing. And I really love that he's not lost that ability to do that. It's only gotten more and more complex, and the ability for him to communicate has gotten so much more elevated and eloquent and observant. And it's just really neat to see how introspective he is when he looks at certain things. It's a really, really cool thing. Then we see him not only being okay with speaking about these things, but also being okay with stepping out and trying new things. I can think of so many examples right now. My mind is just being like filled with all these snapshots of memories of him stepping out and doing really interesting things, fun things, being in the spotlight more and being okay with it, trying on new things and being brave enough and courageous enough to say, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I plan on trying. I really think that this was a gift from going gluten-free. I think that we can do a lot of things to train a behavior and get certain responses, right? We can elicit certain responses with certain stimuli, right? That's just obvious when we look across the board in just the animal kingdom. But we want more than that. We don't want to just have this robotic kind of behavior where it's a learned response. We want to have much more of an intellectual response, an emotional response. We want that to be a connected kind of thing. And I truly believe, I know I keep saying it, but I truly believe that unclogging those pathways and protecting his gut, sealing that gut, making sure that all of the toxins stayed in that closed environment from the mouth all the way through the digestive system, which is what, gluten will actually impact and damage, that allows those toxins to go outside of that digestive system. When you seal that off and all of a sudden you have this like intact system, then it's almost like you're plugging up the leaks in your car. And now everything is being able to run a lot more smoothly and you're getting a better performance and the car is running optimally. So now we look at him in school. He's still in homeschool and we're still kind of, figuring out this dance. What does this look like still? These are still my concerns as a mom and my husband as a dad, looking at him and going, but what will he do in life? What gifts does he have and what talents can we start to shape and mold so that we can prepare him for a career or whatever? And now we start to ask him what it is that he wants to do. One of the things that we did with him, but also with all of our children, is that we would ask them what they want to do, and then we would give them the tools. We wouldn't just say, oh, you want to be a fireman? Oh, you want to be a, whatever. We would say, oh, you want to be that? Okay, then let's figure out what it is that you need to be prepared for that in life. One of the things that he really was interested in was going to space. And so we looked into it and we started, giving him the books at the library. And it was so interesting because he made a beeline for encyclopedia type books. It wasn't like he was reading, fiction about space or anything. He wasn't into like the science fiction or, he was into the technical jargon. He was into, the data. He would literally read these like encyclopedic type books on, the International Space Station and spit that back to you. And it was just like, it was like a computer, but better. Because it wasn't this robotic kind of, response anymore. Now it was him wanting to tell you the interesting things that he had discovered. It was incredible. Another thing that we did was, as we're studying how to be prepared for if he really does want to be on the International Space Station one day, is to study Russian. So we decided as a family, hey, let's all take Russian. It was great. And we all started taking Russian. And because of his mind and the gifts that he had, he was able to really start, learning in a way that was a benefit. His mind was a benefit to him in these things. And that is the really cool thing that I started to see when the gluten was removed. And I'm not going to keep beating this drum, okay? This is probably the last time I'm going to talk about gluten because I know it's probably going to irritate people. But I just will say this. By removing that, it was almost as if all of the special gifts that come with being autistic were heightened. And all of the negative things that were clogging in his brain and causing those traffic jams, those were flushed out. But the gifts stayed, and we were able to hone those gifts while kind of sweeping and brushing those other things away. And it was really kind of neat. Now, I will say this, and this is also kind of, like I mentioned in the first part of these episodes, that there are two sides of the coin. We also started to see that some of those things that were kind of unusual, interesting gifts also went away when the unclogging happened. If you think about it, there are two sides to every coin, right? And sometimes we're able to keep those benefits, but sometimes it's almost like when, I mentioned before about the scheduling. And once we got rid of that hyper focus that he had on scheduling, we also kind of ushered in a new era of not really caring about time at all and not really having that kind of appreciation for how the seconds are ticking by. So there were some nuances of his personality that I saw, this didn't used to be an issue before, where he wasn't as black and white anymore. And so that is a good thing because we definitely want him to be more flexible in society, but that also ushers in a new era where there's a lot more gray that he's playing around with, and maybe it's not so clear to him, some days where it's like, okay, this is right, this is wrong. Now maybe he can push, the boundaries a little bit there. So it was interesting to see. Overall, I will tell you, just an amazing boy. I mean, I can't say enough what a compassionate, gentle, loving, compliant, special child he was and continues to be. And when I say child, I mean our child, not that he's a man now. And so he never lost those qualities, and I'm so thankful for that. But he almost became a little bit more human too, because we started to see more of those airs, right? To err is human. We started to see more of those in him too. But it made the journey more interesting too. What would you rather? Would you rather a perfect little child that was computer-like, was robotic, and had no emotion and couldn't really relate to you, that you never had any issues with as far as following the rules, but you also never had that connection? Or would you want somebody that's more flesh and blood, that makes mistakes, that cries, that says he's sorry, that wants to try harder next time, that struggles and comes to you and says, help, right? We want that. And so we were very, very happy to usher in this new era where this child was really starting to emerge, and we were starting to see all of the beauty that was coming out in new layers every single day. And it was such a joy and such a discovery. And we're still on that discovery. So yeah, it's a really special thing to be able to be on this journey with him and to be able to be a part of his life and to be his mommy. So that's all for today, and I'll see you tomorrow.